Hey everybody, I was dropping my kids off at their cousins and thought I would jump on to do another Cameron's Corner. I know I said I wouldn't do any more on Marco Polo, but I haven't got everything set up with the YouTube channel yet, and I'm going to be working pretty hard for this next week and probably won't be able to set it up until the end of next week. So I thought I'd jump on, and I owe you guys a couple of videos where I show you scriptures and stuff about image of God and that kind of stuff. I think I still owe you. There's like a psalm I want to show you about idols and everything, but anyway, I'll try to remember all that. But since I'm driving, I can't do that, and I will just I think I ended with Genesis chapter 2, and I'm going to jump into Genesis chapter 3 to get it started. And at the beginning of Genesis chapter 3, it says that like the serpent or the snake was like more crafty or subtle than any other beast of the field. And I got to go look at the Hebrew to see if it's talking about wild animals, because that would be significant. I think it is when it says beast of the field. It doesn't mean the domesticated animals. I think it means the wild animals. And I think I told you guys before during the creation, there's always like, sun, moon, and stars. The stars was kind of like the leftover thing. There was the fish and the birds, and then there's the sea monsters that are kind of the leftover thing. And there was kind of the domesticated animals and humans and creeping things. And then there's like the beasts. They're kind of like the wild beasts. They're kind of the leftover thing. The leftover things are always kind of manifest throughout the scriptures as the agents of chaos, the stuff that comes back to haunt humanity, in the future, or represent chaos and death. And so it's interesting that the serpent is one of those creatures. So that's one thing. The other thing is that it's a serpent, and there's scriptures outside of Genesis that connect. The word is Nahash, okay? And there's like a scripture in Amos, I'll have to show you all, where it says that the sea monster is a serpent, okay? The sea monster, like in the middle of the deep, is a serpent. There's, it's either Isaiah 27 or 29, I can't remember, and definitely in Revelation 12, the serpent and the seven-headed dragon are identified. So again, there's like a connection between the serpent and the dragon. In an ancient mindset, a serpent and a dragon would be like the same class of species, but the snake would just maybe be like a smaller version of a dragon or a sea monster. Okay, so there's this idea when the serpent comes that it might be like one of the most wild of the animals, like it might even be, there's an ambiguity there, okay? And part of the ambiguity is it a bad snake? Is it a chaos monster, in snake form? Or is it, on the flip side, the word Nahash also is connected to the word bronze, and there is later on the bronze serpent that Moses raises up is connected to this word, this Nahash word, and even the brass or the bronze serpent that Moses raises up is later called Nehushtan, which is got a connection to Nahash, and so like basically what I'm getting at is it's a root word. I got to go look it up. When I get home, I'll look up I'll show you guys the etymology and everything, the Hebrew etymology. But basically it can mean like brass or something that shines, okay? Like often if something is brass or gold or silver, it's shiny, and it can represent that it's heavenly actually, all right? And there are the fiery flying serpents. They also use the terminology of seraphim, and the seraphim, like from Isaiah, the Hebrew word for seraph means to burn. So there's this idea that but they're also snake-like. And so what I'm getting at, I'm doing a poor job of putting this together for you. What I'm getting at is the word Nahash to describe the snake is ambiguous. you can go down a path that suggests that it would be like a glorious angel, guardian angel type being that lives in the heavens and as a, is like a guardian, like the seraphim were guardians, or, like there were snake deities that like guarded the Pharaoh, okay? They weren't bad, they were good. And then you can think of it like that, or it could be represent like the sea monster, the chaos dragon, okay? And I think that's on purpose. The point is you don't know who's coming. Is it an angel of light, or is it an angel that's fallen? And in the story, we know that the snake represents Lucifer, and he's both, right? He once was an angel of light. He's a son of the morning. He, is a character that should be on Adam and Eve's side. He should be on Heavenly Father's side. And he even dresses like a little bit like somebody, in the temple ceremony, he dresses like somebody who might, be on the good side, and a little bit like it, but also not like it. There's still differences, right? And then there's the other side of it but is he a bad guy? And so the answer is yes, and that's what makes him tricky. So even in this, what I'm getting at is, in the symbolism of the snake in the story, is this double meaning. Is he a good guy or a bad guy? You can't tell. And when you trace out the etymology, like that word nachash, into the other biblical stories in the Bible, sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. And I think that's the point, is that he came, and it's questionable if this is a guy that's helping or hurting, right? And he's trying to make it seem like he's trying to help, but as Moses chapter 4 points out, his intention was to hurt. Like, he thought by getting Adam and Eve to eat of the fruit, he was going to undermine God's purposes. But as Moses chapter 4 points out, it's like one of the first verses, like verse 3 or 4 or something. It says that Lucifer didn't know the mind of God, and so he thought he was going to undermine God's plan by having them eat of the fruit, but it was actually what God wanted. Okay, so you have this cunning snake come. There's a word play. Nahash is one of the word plays. There's another word play because the word like cunning or subtle, clever, is related to. It has a very similar looking letters, like the root letters of the Hebrew word are very similar to nakedness, because Adam and Eve were naked at that time. And so there's this like a little play on words that Adam and Eve's nakedness kind of shows their naivete, like they're still kind of childlike, whereas the snake's subtleness, cleverness is like the opposite. Like he's a little too crafty, you could say. Maybe Adam and Eve were a little too naive, and the serpent is a little too crafty. And there's this wordplay in the Hebrew that kind of brings that out, that shows like the contrast between the snake who's coming and the people he's coming to. Okay, and also, no, I think that's enough on the snake to get it going. So he comes and he tempts Eve, and he says, like, surely you won't die if you eat this fruit. It will, it'll give you knowledge of good and evil. It'll make you like the gods, right? And now there's an important thing here. He's telling a lie and a truth, because later on, after they eat the fruit, Jehovah says they've eaten the fruit and they've become as one of us, knowing good and evil. So that wasn't a lie. Like, Jehovah confirms that's true. Like, they gained knowledge through eating of the fruit, but the lie was that you wouldn't die. Okay, because the commandment, as if you remember, when Adam and Eve, or when Adam was created, God said, "Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil." And Adam, and in the Moses account, here's a little piece I'll digress on for a minute. In the Moses account, it says something like, "Nevertheless, thou mayest choose for thyself. Nevertheless, I forbid it, because in the day you eat of it, you'll die." Okay, so like there's this, like the Lord's kind of saying, like, look, you can eat it if you want to. Just know if you do, you will die. And he says, I forbid it. Now, you and I normally read those words and think, God his will. His will is, I forbid you to eat this. And it makes it seem as if God is speaking out both sides of his mouth. Like, hey, you can eat it if you want, but I forbid it. And it's like, well, which one is it? Do you forbid it or can I eat it? Right? And I think the way to solve that problem, in my opinion, the doctrine of God's glory is one of the most important doctrines that makes sense of most of the scriptures. It makes sense of the creation. It will make sense. Now I'm going to show how it's going to make sense of the fall. It helps make sense of the atonement. It's actually just a doctrine we just don't think about, because too often we just kind of skip past that part, that like God is really glorious, right? Like he shines really bright, and he shines so bright, his glory and light like fill the immensity of space. And it's actually like the force field that he generates that like holds everything in existence, right? So you have to remember, like God, we look like God and we're his children, but we're not like God, right? Remember Michael's name, who is like God? None of us are like him yet. So we shouldn't think that he has a body like our bodies. His body is also like a force of nature, right? In fact, you could say it's the force of nature. It's like the thing that holds everything together. So when God says, I forbid it, sometimes he doesn't even have to say it. Like, he can be like, look, you're free to eat if you want, and I'm not going to stop you. Just so you know, though, once you eat it, something's going to happen to you that will make it so that you cannot like jive with me anymore. You know, I was talking about how God like creates like a force field, like a magnet. And as long as the iron is like within the magnetic field, it'll line up and be organized. And then once it's disconnected from the magnetic field, it'll fall apart. And that's, I think, what God is saying is when he says, I forbid it, he's like, my magnetic field, the force field that I generate, you know, the light of Christ that shoots forth out of me into everything, that holds everything together, forbids it. Like you won't be able to be connected to me anymore. You will die. You'll be cut off from my presence, and that's why you will die. And the fruit, this is an important part of the story. Joseph Smith taught that Adam and Eve, before they ate the fruit, that the veins of their body was filled with spirit. See, and that's kind of like God's breath, right? God, he breathed into them the breath of life. So they have his spirit, and it's like coursing through their veins. I don't know if it's literally coursing through their veins. I don't know if Joseph Smith meant it literally or not. Just from a concept point of view, though, it makes sense that, like, you know, quote unquote, the Spirit of God is coursing through their veins. Like they are filled literally in their body with God's Spirit. But Joseph Smith also taught that once they ate the fruit, that veins are no longer filled with spirit. They were filled with blood. So like, and what Joseph, again, does he literally mean this? Probably, I don't know. But conceptually speaking, what Joseph is saying is that their bodies changed. Okay, they went from whatever state they were in the Garden of Eden, which is closer to probably like a terrestrial state. They weren't quite celestial, because remember, in the Abraham account it says, "Let us go down," for their space there. So they're going down in power levels to come to the earth. And when they make it, so it's not celestial, it's probably like terrestrial. This is actually what the brethren have taught for a long time, is that the earth in its paradisiacal state is like a terrestrial kingdom. And so Adam and Eve's bodies are probably terrestrial. But then when they eat the fruit, their bodies become telestial, like they go down a level or maybe multiple levels. And that's what Joseph's getting at when he's talking about they have spirit in their veins versus blood in their veins, is that their body literally changes. And if their body literally changes, it's cut off from the Spirit of God. If the spirit that was coursing through their veins is God's Spirit, and it's no longer coursing through their veins, and instead it's something else like blood, then they are cut off from God. And what have I been saying this whole time? When you're cut off from God, you die. You die both physically and spiritually. Like your body will fall apart, and you will no longer feel that connection to God. And if you don't feel connected to God, then you die as to things pertaining to righteousness. That's another way the scriptures talk about it, meaning that all the good feelings, you know, we say the fruits of the Spirit are peace and love and long suffering, and like all the good emotions we have come because of our spirits are being touched and interacted upon by God's Spirit. And so it's like it calls forth, you know, God's Spirit like calls forth those good things from our spirits, right? Because we're light and truth, and his light and truth pours into us, and it like, you know, brings it out, manifests it, right? So that's what we experience as love and peace and joy and all those things, because, you know, this is how President Boyd K. Packer talked about our conscience. He said that, you know, like conscience is like a memory, and the light of Christ like brings those memories out of us, right? Because at one point in time we lived with Heavenly Father in the premortal life, and there were lessons learned, there were things, doctrines taught and stuff, and so the light of Christ like calls, like there's something hidden down in there under the veil of our minds or whatever, in our hearts, and the light of Christ can call it forth, okay? So it can pull that out. But I also think the light of Christ doesn't just call forth what's already inside of us. I think it actually also pours into us things that we lacked before, right? So you don't have to be self-sufficient, you guys. You can, you know, his grace is sufficient for you, right? There's goodness in you, but at the same time, he can give you even more goodness. His grace can fill the gaps, okay? And so in any event, what I'm getting at is, if you're cut off from that grace, if you're cut off from that light that pours out of him into us, then you die. You die as to things pertaining to righteousness. You quit feeling all those good emotions, all those good things. You don't have those good thoughts anymore. You're like lame and Lemuel, you're past feeling, or your heart is hardened. That's Alma 34. Without an atonement, everyone's hearts would be hardened, right? It's like you lose the capacity to like feel all the good stuff. You die spirit. That's the spiritual death. And then the physical death is your body crumbles back to the dust, right? And so now you're cut off from God's presence, and you don't have a physical body, and you're miserable forever, kind of idea, okay? So that's why God's saying, you can eat of this tree if you want to, but I forbid it. And I don't think he's saying my will forbids it. He's saying the magnetic presence of my being will forbid it. The minute you eat of that fruit, you will die, because you will no longer be able to be on the same frequency, you could say. You no longer vibe with me, as the teenagers might say, right? You'll be on a different frequency, and you will fall apart and die, spiritually, emotionally, physically, everythingly, okay? And so that's how I would explain that. And to me, the key to that is in God's glory, and it comes into the story when God comes to talk to them. And I'll get there in a minute, okay? I'm trying to remember the scriptures in chapter 3. Like we talked about the snake, and then they eat. God tells them, don't eat of it unless you die. But then the snake lies to her, but also tells Eve kind of the truth, and she eats it, okay? Eve, now here's the thing. There's a lot of question around Eve's decision to eat the fruit, and a lot of interpretation. And there's like two paths that this goes down, okay? One path is Eve is a hero, and the other path is Eve is a villain, okay? And traditionally, it's been Eve is a villain, right? Eve has done something awful. We'd all be living in the Garden of Eden if it wasn't for Eve eating this fruit. And, you know, and dang it, Eve, we could all be happy if it wasn't for you. It's all your fault. And then that turned, because this is what human beings do, that interpretation turned into a lot of like women hating over the millennia. Or, you know, a lot of women have been mistreated because people are like, well, you're a daughter of Eve, you're just like Eve, ruining everything, right? And that's been really bad for women. That's happened, okay? It's not good. The restoration has come along and said that God wanted this to happen. And that's kind of what I've been trying to build out with the way the creation story is told and everything, that this was set up. Like he set us up to be tried and tested. He wanted the fall. The reason why he can't make the fall happen is because for it to be a fall, you and I have to fall. Like, it has to be our choice, and it has to be cut off from him, right? Like, it's so he can't be the one to make it happen. Someone else has to do it. And as I said, in the way the story's set up, there's these subtle hints that suggest that maybe that's actually the very purpose of Eve's creation, was to be this divine helpmeet who wasn't given, in the Genesis story at least, wasn't given the commandment not to eat. And so then maybe in order to progress the story forward, Eve came along so that she could progress it, okay? Now, and in the church we'll say things like Eve knew what she was doing. And even in the temple, there's this idea of Eve kind of is pondering, like, what will happen if I eat this fruit? Yeah, I need to, basically she realizes that she and Adam needed to experience the opposite of what they were currently experiencing so that they could like learn the difference between good and evil of their own accord through their own experience, right? Like it couldn't just be a concept in their minds anymore. It needed to be something they actually experienced. So now, and so we've emphasized, like, it was cool that Eve kind of realized that. She realized it in this conversation with the snake, with the devil, who's telling her some truths and telling her some lies, right? And the lie he's telling her is that you're not going to die. It's all made up. You're not going to die. You'll just gain knowledge of good and evil. The truth was they would gain knowledge of good and evil. Like this was the way to gain knowledge of good and evil, okay? It just was a lie that they wouldn't die. So, okay. Now, what I want to point out is like we kind of go to the interpretation that Eve was a villain is wrong. She was not a villain. But then sometimes in the church, I think we make it out as if because Eve was doing something that God wanted, that the fall didn't have disastrous consequences. And that's too far, okay? The fall had to be a fall. It had to be disastrous. It is what God wanted. See, it's like a paradox, but it's true. Like God wanted this to happen. He wanted the fall. He wanted the disaster to happen. He wanted the negative parts of creation to be activated, right? Because that would further the plan. And so Eve did further the plan 100%. And I'm confident something clicked for her and she understood what needed to happen and she did it. Okay. Like, I think all of those teachings are accurate, but I want to push to make it more nuanced that even though she understood it conceptually, she still didn't know what actually was entailed because she was in the Garden of Eden, right? Like Adam and Eve, while in the Garden of Eden, when they're created, they have the veil drawn over them. In fact, that's taught to us in the temple. They don't remember their premortal life. They are like basically little children in that garden. So whatever they think they know, like whatever Eve thought she knew, is the same knowledge that like a teenager has about trying to live out on their own and get a job and pay for the bills themselves and all that stuff. They don't really know. Like mom and dad can tell them all they want, like about how hard life might be and all the things they need to prepare for. They won't really know it until they have to do it, right? And that's the point I'm trying to make about Eve is that I think she understood conceptually what needed to happen, but she did not understand like really what the consequences were going to be. Like had no idea of like the problems and the evil and the trials and the tribulation and the suffering that would be unleashed. And for good reason, because if she knew, she probably wouldn't have made the decision, right? Like it had to be kind of like in her innocence, just like when you're young and you don't know, you're just kind of ignorant, you're just pressing forward. Like if you really knew how hard it all would be, a lot of people may not make the journey to begin with, right? So like they needed to be naive, they needed to be innocent, they needed it to be like not completely understood. They could be told and kind of conceptualize it and be like, oh yeah, this is the path to take in order to learn and grow. But they wouldn't really understand it until they're in the middle of it, right? Okay, so I just think it's important to see that nuance that Eve, as much as she figured out, was still like innocent. And I think this is doctrinally important to point out, and I'll explain here in a minute what I'm getting at, okay? But at the same time, like it unleashed, like Doctrine and Covenants section 29 says that when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, they became subject to the devil, okay? So like the devil in the creation story is the snake for sure. And notice Adam and Eve were supposed to rule over the animals, and here's a snake, and instead of them ruling over the animal, meaning like basically, being in charge of it, they listened to the snake, so they became subject to the snake in the story, right? So there's like this reversal. They, by listening, they're now taking advice from the snake, and and even if the advice is partially true, you're still subjecting yourself to the snake. That's in the imagery of the story, right? Also, if you remember, I said the darkness on the face of the deep. there's this long-standing Christian tradition that it was like the devil and his angels after they were cast out of heaven. So though, like, the darkness is activated, like all the troubles of all the bad stuff, all the things that could hurt you in the creation get activated, right? Now all of a sudden, the sea dragon is like in the book of Revelation, there's a 7-headed dragon now roaming around on land, breathing out water, trying to drown everybody. That happens because of the fall. Like, it unleashed the dragon in this world, okay? The chaos monster. And that's important. Like, that had to happen. Like, we had to be exposed to chaos and death, but it's still in a bubble. It's still like being done. It's kind of like when you inoculate someone, you give them a shot with like a little bit of the flu or whatever, like a dead virus, so that they learn, so that your body adapts to it on a small scale, so that when the real thing comes, they're more ready for it. And that's what this life is yes, the devil is unleashed, but only so much. There's still a protective bubble. The firmament is still over our head. We're still, there's still a daytime. There's still the earth starts to produce thorns and thistles, but you can still, if you work hard enough, then there'll be food. Like, it's not like, not everything is lost. It's just a little wonky, right? And so but that's the point, is you had to kind of unleash the wonkiness in order for it couldn't just be eaten all the time. The other part of this had to be unleashed so that it could fulfill its purpose in God's plan. So what I'm getting at is, don't minimize, like, yes, Eve did the right thing and Eve figured it out and was like we should praise Eve. I 100% believe that, but we should also at the same time recognize that the fall was really a fall, that it cut us off from the presence of God. That's 2 Nephi chapter 2 says this, Alma 42 says this, many other scriptures say this. It cut us off from the presence of God, and it unleashed the devil basically and made us subject to him. And that was by design, okay? And the reason why is because, if you remember, the status reversal rite of passage. We are children of God that live in his presence, and in order to fulfill our destiny, we have to go through the status reversal rite of passage. Just like the chieftain had to leave the village and go out, the African chieftain had to leave his village, go out and be beat with a stick so that he can come back to the village and be chief and like hold the stick. He couldn't learn how to hold the stick wisely or to do it right unless he was the person being beaten, okay? You and I have to leave our heavenly courts above, where we lived with Heavenly Father, and come and be subject to like the worst possible scenarios, so that we can learn how to rule over those scenarios ourselves when we go back to heaven. Okay, it's a status reversal, right? You go from being like at the top of the hierarchy to the bottom of it. And by going to the bottom of it, you learn a lot of things, so that when you go back to the top of the hierarchy, when you go back to being like, being what you're supposed to be, which is a son or daughter of God who will rule over many things, you'll be way more wise and ready to do it, okay? So don't undermine the fact that the fall is a nasty thing. Like, it needed to happen. Eve should be praised, but at the same time, it unleashed the devil and all the bad stuff. We need to you have to hold both of these concepts at the same time in order for the whole story to make sense. So when we emphasize the bad and we're like, then Eve's a villain, and that's not true. And if we emphasize Eve was so heroic, that it almost is like, it undermines kind of like what actually happened, and it undermines kind of the next step of the atonement, that you needed someone to come to crush the head of the serpent. Now, as it says in Genesis 3, when he talks about that, you need someone to come and crush the head of the serpent, because that serpent's going to be running around biting people and causing all kinds of trouble. And so, don't undermine that the world had fallen and that we were cut off from the presence of God. So I feel like I'm maybe not doing a good job of explaining this, but just realize you got to hold these concepts together. And that's more scripturally accurate, I think, because some scriptures talk about how awful the fall is, and some scriptures talk about how awesome it is that we fell. Like 2 Nephi 2 says, Adam fell that men might be, and men are they might have joy. Like, this was part of God's plan. Like, God, in fact, this shows you again that God set it up, because God wanted them to reproduce, but according to 2 Nephi 2, they wouldn't reproduce in the Garden of Eden. They had to actually fall. Then God would let them start having kids, because God didn't want them to live in the Garden of Eden at first. He wants us to come back to the Garden of Eden, or even better than the Garden of Eden, which is, a celestial life, which is better than the Garden of Eden. But he wants us to come back after we've gone through this status reversal, after we've kind of gone to the bottom. And so that's the point. We have to go to the bottom and actually experience it. C.S. Lewis criticized this viewpoint and said that, you could learn all that you needed by resisting the initial temptation. He's like, it's silly to think that you have to actually experience sin in order to know how bad sin is. He said that, resisting sin is good enough. And I would say, you can learn enough about sin by resisting sin. And I would say that C.S. Lewis is right, only because we're resisting sin in a world where we are fallen. See, if you and I were Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and we were innocent in our minds, it's just like those teenagers that don't really know what it's like to pay the bills themselves without mom and dad's safety net, right? You and I don't really know what it's like to resist sin unless that sin really is tempting to us because we have fallen. Because there's some part of our being that has been corrupted and desires it, right? And that's why I don't think C.S. Lewis, as much as I love C.S. Lewis, and most of the time I think he's dead spot on and awesome, in this instance I think he's wrong because of that. I think because Adam and Eve had not been corrupted, had not fallen, so they didn't really know the power of temptation. Like, even though not in the same way that you can when you have to resist temptation in a fallen state. Resisting temptation in an Edenic state isn't as hard as resisting temptation when you've got a fallen body that desires the temptation, right? That has been corrupted, that has been snake bit. And that's the point. The snake has bit us and his venom is in us. And you could say that's why the Spirit of God has left the body and it's filled with blood now. You could even suggest that blood is the snake venom, in the metaphors that the story is telling us and that Joseph Smith is kind of adding through his own teachings. It's like, that's what our blood is. It's like snake venom in a sense, right? Like, and we've been snake bit, and because of that, we like crave things and want things that we wouldn't normally crave or want if our bodies were made whole, if our bodies were still terrestrial at least, or even celestial beyond all of it, right? So anyway, that's Brigham Young, and David A. Bednar recently taught that repeated Brigham Young's teachings is that after the fall, our bodies became subject to the devil, and like the dust of the earth is subject to him. And so he tempts us through that. He has this power over us now and can like tempt us in a way that he couldn't before. And that's the test, though, is can you resist? Can you subject the body, the physical body, to the spirit, basically? And if you can do that, and the way you do that, of course, is through Christ, because the spirit is willing and the flesh is weak, right? So we're all going to basically lose to the flesh unless you have Christ, okay? And that's in 2 Nephi 2, it says this, that because Christ came and did what he did, we are redeemed from the fall, and we can choose between good and evil. All things have been given to us, and we are free from the flesh. See, like, because Christ implanted his light in us again, there's a little bit of leverage against the flesh now. I can feel his presence. I can feel my conscience is awake. I can feel the tugs and the pulls that he's his enticements to like leave the flesh behind, Cameron, leave the fallen things behind, come this way, come to this, walk the covenant path to me. And so because he's planted that in my soul through the atonement, I have a real choice again, and I have an option to follow him, and I can choose. I'm spiritually alive, at least in that sense. And so, I'm all over the map on this one. I'm gonna gather my thoughts and try again, and I'll show you guys some scriptures. But I think that's enough for now. Yeah, I'll come back because there's more I want to say about agency and choices and fallenness. Like 2 Nephi 9 talks about if there never was a resurrection and we had fallen, we would become devils to an angel, or angels to a devil, sorry. And I want to point out that those kinds of scriptures, I'll read them with you to show, like, how can those scriptures be true, and then also at the same time, point out like it was the right thing for us to come into this life, and that like we should praise Eve. We have to keep those things in balance, right? Don't minimize the negativity of the fall, and don't villainize Eve. Both are wrong. Eve is a hero. Eve did her job, and women are not inherently bad because of what Eve did. That is a false doctrine. And Eve sensed something, caught something, and made the right choice. But the right choice was to leave the presence of God, to begin the process of the status rite of reversal, the status reversal rite of passage, to allow us to be subjected to the devil, to be snake bit, to basically be in need of a redeemer. That was always the plan. Remember, the lamb, he's the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The plan always was for us to need the redeemer. Because again, if you're going to rule over others and you don't know what it's like to need charity, to need welfare, basically, to need a redeemer, then you'll lack wisdom that you need that. You and I need that. Like, it teaches us lessons that enable us to be a better, wiser child of God that can like fulfill God's purposes in the eternities by basically becoming subject to the devil and needing a redeemer. That whole process. Okay, so I'm gonna stop and I'll go kind of reorganize my thoughts, and I'll show you guys some scriptures. And there's more to say about like what the curse was and everything, thorns and thistles and all that jazz. So, okay, talk to you later.